Hey everybody, Jim the Tabletop Engineer here, and welcome to a new episode, another Paint and Ramble. In this episode, I'm going to be painting up this miniature. It's from the Frostgrave Fantasy series. I honestly cannot remember what it's called. I will hunt the name down and put a link to this miniature in the description for this video. This one could equally be used in sci-fi or fantasy. I really like it. It's sort of hard to describe. It looks like an undead, zombie-like creature, but the neck is stretched, and you can see what appears to be it's either rib bones or the torso, or it could be a skeleton, a skeletal like outerwear. I don't know. It's a pretty cool looking mini. I'm going to be painting this. I'm going to put the camera down to the tabletop in just a second. But as I paint this, today what I want to talk about. What do I want to talk about? I got an email recently from a viewer who asked me, which do I prefer playing more, role-playing games or war games? Because any of you who have followed my channel for a while, you know I do both. I've been playing D&D for many years, decades. I've been playing 5e for quite a while now, since it came out. But I also play other role-playing games. I play, Monster of the Week is a favorite of mine. If you're not familiar with it, it's kind of cool. Think X-Files, where each week the players are taking on a new enemy. What else do I like to play? I like to play Kids on Bikes. It's sort of like a Goonies, but with supernatural overtones. There's a lot of RPGs that I'm willing to play, or that I have played. Sometimes I get away from fantasy and go to sci-fi, and then I come back. But I also play a lot of war games. Not a lot, but not a variety of them, but I play war games. Probably right now I probably play more war games than I do RPGs, simply because I find it easier to find a single opponent for a war game versus a table of 4 to 6 players, because I'm typically the GM. So let me move the camera down, and while I paint this guy up, I want to talk to you about the question, which do you prefer more? Well, I'll answer that. It's a hard question, but it's a good one. So let me get started. I'm going to put the camera down here. I've got my wet palette. My paint's off to my left here. Now this guy, I have no idea what I'm going to start out with, but I know I want to go with I think I'm going to go with a dark blue skin and then do lighter dry brushing to bring it up. And the darkest blue I have right now, I have this Prussian blue, and I also have I have 2 Prussian blues. Oh, this is dark Prussian blue. Let's go with the dark. Why not? Let's talk about it. RPGs and war games. Well, they have a lot of similarities. And by a lot, I mean, it depends on the kind of play in RPGs that you're used to. The similarities are they often, depending on your GM, they often use terrain, either two-dimensional, like a playmat, or gotta put my glasses on, a playmat, or three-dimensional terrain, like, structures and things like that. They use miniatures, obviously. RPGs, a lot of players play RPGs without miniatures. They do what's called theater of the mind. Some of them use digital, the online tools like Roll20, and I forget the other ones. They'll use digital miniatures, like tokens. Sometimes they're three-dimensional on the screen, like they have height, width, and they look like an actual miniature. And then other times they're flat, like a little token with just maybe the picture of your character's face or something like that. So RPGs and war games, I think it's the things that they have in common is what draws me. I tend to avoid games that don't have an aspect of play that allows me some creativity. Now, let me explain that. I come from a family of makers. My dad was always doing carpentry out in the garage or barn. My mom was a crafter. She could make anything if she put her mind to it. And she would involve myself and my brother and sister. And so crafting was just never it wasn't hard. Now, maybe it was when I was younger and I just don't remember it. But crafting was always enjoyable because my mom would show us how to make stuff from nothing. I mean, she would use junk and cardboard and whatever she had on hand. And my fondest memory, and I'm getting off topic here, but I'll tell you, she made these little toy soldier clothespin Christmas ornaments when I was real young. I remember I got to make one with her. And it was the clothespin that had the round dot on the top and the two legs, which were the pins. It wasn't the kind that's mechanical, but just the fixed kind. And she would paint them, like black on the bottom for the boots, white for the pants, red for the jacket. And then she would use popsicle sticks to create the arms. She would paint the face, and then she would glue this black pom-pom, like a little piece of frizzly that she got from the craft store. She would glue that on for the helmet, so they kind of look like the British, guards or whatever. I just have fond memories of that. But those were the kinds of things I grew up with. So why am I talking about that? So to get back to it, I like to make things. I like to paint. I like to craft. I like to make things for my games, whether it's terrain or painting a miniature. So it's obvious that RPGs and war games will offer me that. You don't have to do that. If you don't paint or you don't craft, you can buy pre-painted miniatures. You can buy pre-crafted 3D terrain. You can buy it 3D printed. You can buy it from the store where you sort of assemble it yourself. There's some great do-it-yourself terrain out there from a company called, it's called Battle Systems, and I'll grab one in a minute and show it to you. I got turned on to Battle Systems when I discovered a game called Core Space, which is a science fiction tabletop game that uses miniatures and it uses terrain, and you could call it a war game, but you can play it solo or competitive. But it comes with, let me rephrase. Battle Systems makes games, but they also make terrain, and their terrain is made from this. It's thick, heavy cardboard. I don't even know if cardboard's the right word for it. And then they use the metal die punches to punch it out. It's got a gloss coating for the doors and the bits that give it the detail. And then of course they punch it, and you punch it out when you buy it. It comes on these flat sheets. You probably know what I'm talking about. You punch it out, and then you assemble it. It uses a lot of groove technology to make things stand up. But it's really good stuff. They've got fantasy and they've got sci-fi. So if you're not a terrain maker, you can totally find companies like that. And they're not the only ones out there. There are other companies that do similar stuff. There are companies that sell, 3D tiles, like Dwarven Forge is a big one. If you want to 3D print your own, companies like Fat Dragon Games, you can buy from their sites or their Kickstarters collections of like dungeon tiles or town, city, ruins, trees, what have you. And then you just 3D print them. So no crafting required, although you probably will want to paint them. When it comes to RPGs or war games, to ask me, which do you prefer? It's a hard question, and I'm not going to defer it. I'll answer it. My answer would be it depends on my mood, and it depends on my time. Obviously, with RPGs, there are RPGs out there that you can play with just two people, a referee or a GM and a player. There are RPGs out there that you can play solo, and I'm getting ready to share with y'all one of them that I'm going to be doing a video series called 4 Against Darkness, and that first video is coming this week. And then, of course, there are your typical RPGs, which are played in a group of, usually there's one person that's the referee or the GM, whatever you want to call them, and then there's the players. If you have access to a group of players that want to play the game you want to play, then you have yourself an RPG group to play with. And so when I say it's based on time in the sense that, how long will it take you to assemble a group or find a group or get to a game store where you can play. Those of us with kids, now let me tell you, my kids are older, they're 14 and 11, but when they were younger, I could not leave the house until our babysitter showed up on Wednesday nights, because I was DMing a DM game, a Dungeons and Dragons game at the game store, and I had players there waiting, and there were times when they were waiting for me, and I usually tried to show up on time or early. There were times I was just getting there as it was started, and then there were times when I had to get on the phone and basically text them and say, guys, I am so sorry, but my babysitter did not show up tonight. And those of you who have ever had to deal with babysitters know that When you find a good one who's reliable, you'll pay them anything they ask. I was unfortunate to have a neighborhood babysitter who was in high school, and there were times at the last minute she would just call me 5 minutes before I needed to be on the road and say, Mr. Kelly, I can't make it tonight. Well, my kids were young enough that I could not drag them to the game store. So, I wasn't going to do that to my players. So time is an issue. If you have time, and when you have young kids, you often don't have much time. That becomes an issue where if you want to play games, you've got to play games that are either solo that you can play at home or quickly with your neighbor or wherever, or you've got to find games that you can get to, play in an hour, and get out. Because, family, we always say it, family comes first. And so I refused when my kids were younger to spend too much time on my hobbies, because when they're young, the time goes fast. Now my 14-year-old doesn't want to have anything to do with me, which is, I'm exaggerating, it's not really true, but he's got a life, he's got friends, he's got activities he likes to do, and he's got his own interests and hobbies, and I don't push mine on him. So when he wants to go on Friday night to play Magic, I don't really gripe at him, because I understand that's his he wants to do that. When he goes and plays baseball on weekends with his baseball team, I get it. It's an issue of time. Time is always one of those limiting factors, or at least one of those factors that goes into deciding whether or not you want to play RPGs or war games. Now, when time's limited, I go to war games, because war games, traditionally, I can play them very quick. I can play them with one person. I only need to find one opponent. I don't need to find 6 friends. I need to find one person who can meet me. And then we negotiate on the day and time, and I tell my wife, and boom, off I go. RPGs are a little different. RPGs, you really have to make plans. Now, the games I like to play are typically the kind with 4 or more players. I don't really like RPGs where it's 1 or 2 players. There's not enough variation in the action of the game when you have 2 players. If you have a fighter and a magic user, great. They can go into a dungeon. They're probably going to die. They're just 2 of them. Unless it's 2 players running 2 characters. Then it's kind of odd, because when you have 2 players playing multiple characters, I typically find the games bogged down. So I tell you this only because lately I have been heavy into war games, only because it's been so easy to find an opponent. RPGs, right now with COVID still going on, I'm not having much luck in getting a game going. And when I do get a game going, I'm going to do old school essentials, which is OSE is what they call it. It's an old school D&D variant or a clone. It's what they call a BX clone, Basic Experts, based off the 2nd edition of Dungeons & Dragons, the basic set and the expert set that was Moldvay, I think was the box or title. Or the nickname they give it. What I'm going to do right now, this paint is it's kind of cold down here in my basement, so the paint is drying very slow. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a quick break. I'm going to gather some things I want to share with you, and then I'm going to come back and finish this guy up. Okay. Before I get back to painting the mini, I had mentioned battle systems, some of their terrain in this video earlier that you can buy. And let me share one with you. This is one called Battle Systems Outlands Core Set. It's a hefty box. You can find these usually between $80 and $100. They're not cheap, but you get a lot with it. As you can see, this is a 3-dimensional space sci-fi series. But it's not just the terrain. Let me show you. I don't know this for a fact, but I'm pretty sure that all of these big battle systems, the bigger boxes like this one, they all come with a 2x2 mat. It's the neoprene, like a mouse pad. You gotta love it, because it just adds to the realism when you put all this terrain out. I have a lot of different variety of these, but a lot of the games I play, Core Space and 5 Parsecs from Home, which are 2 sci-fi games that I enjoy playing, they typically play on a 2x2 mat. So this is perfect. So let me show you, before I get back to the painting, this is what I'm talking about with now I haven't punched these out yet. This is a packaged stack of terrain. You can see it's printed in color, and then they have a machine that punches it. So this is how easy it is. So here's a single sheet, and you can, I don't know if you can see how thick it is. It's about a 1/16 of an inch. I don't know if that's millimeter, what that is in millimeters, but you basically just pop it out like this. It's that easy. It's very, their stuff is always well cut, and it almost just falls out. And you can see the grooves that will correspond to, I'm probably going to mess this up, but let me just take one of these out and show you. This little side guardrail, these little pieces pop out. And by the way, you're going to end up with a lot of little debris bits when you punch all these dozens of sheets out. So like this, I guess, would maybe, no, well, this isn't it, but you can see it. It's the kind that slots together. You know, it does like this. So if I had 2 of these, I could make a standing wall, although I know this doesn't go here. But it's just really well done 3D terrain that you don't have to craft yourself. All right, so there you go. Battle Systems, Tabletop Games and Terrain. The website is, it's called battlesystems.co.uk. They are a UK company. They have this in fantasy and science fiction versions, and they have a lot of different varieties. I mean, you've got, and then they also sell individual packs, like of just like one small thing. They'll come in a Ziploc-like type bag. They're less expensive. But like you can find like a tower or a graveyard or something like that. They're usually much less expensive and smaller in size, enough to fit in a single bag. All right, so I allowed my miniature to dry, and I'm going to move the camera back down. So what I've done is I have intentionally painted him this dark blue, and it's not showing up very well in the video, and that's okay. I didn't mind that. So now what I want to do is I want to bring that color up. So I'm going to go with a lighter blue, and this is where it's going to take a little time, because what I'm going to do here is I'm not going to paint the whole thing light blue. I'm going to paint some of the muscly, raised parts of him. And this is just where it just sort of takes time. You got to go slow. And I'm going to hold this up so you can see it. You might be able to see what I'm doing here. I'll take some really good photos of this and post them to the end of the video so you'll be able to see it when it's done. But what I'm doing is I want to give him this look of, it's sort of a combination of armor and a sort of a combination of just different colored panels on his skin. I don't know what the name of that would be, other than I just think it looks very cool. It looks both scary and alien. Scary for sci-fi and fantasy, and alien for like a sci-fi type game. I've seen this effect done by other painters. I've heard it called like cell shading or shade cell. I can't remember, but I'm not going for that. That's those guys are crazy the level of detail they put in it. All I'm doing is just going with just some unusual colorations on his skin, so the dark blue shows through and the lighter blue stands out. What I'm going to do after this, I'll go with an even lighter blue and go over those parts, see what they look like. And I'm not trying to be perfect, because I don't want it to look perfect. I don't want it to look like it's armor. I want it to look like his natural colors are just these variations of dark blue, light blue. I have it in my mind what I want him to look like, which is going to be this multicolored, crazy-looking alien zombie. He sort of has elements of both. He looks like a zombie in a way, but he looks very alien. I will probably end up using him in both fantasy RPGs and in sci-fi, although he does look more sci-fi-ish, which is funny because he is a fantasy miniature for the Frostgrave game. And again, I will find out what this miniature is, what it is, and I'll put a link for you in the video description. I do know that it came from North Star Miniatures, which is who usually does the Frostgrave, Stargrave, the Osprey type miniatures, and they always put out metal miniatures. And, oh, by the way, this is metal. I should have told you that from the beginning. I primed him already. He's metal. Now, I don't know if you can still get these metals, because what happens is when Osprey comes out with a new game or a new book, like a new wargaming book or whatever, North Star will have what they call a Nick starter, not a kick starter. The owner's name is Nick, and I think I don't think it was him that did that. I think it was a fan. Somebody referred to him as Nick starters, and it just kind of stuck. And he does these things called Nick starters, where basically it's sort of grouping together multiple buyers. He'll offer something for a price, And then as more and more people jump on and buy, he offers add-ons and freebies and stuff. And usually what the freebies are is they are extra miniatures. And they're usually metal because they run prototype batches of miniatures before they, and I could be wrong. Nick, if you're out there listening, tell me if I'm wrong. But as I understand it, they do metal miniatures in a certain quantity, and then they start doing them in resin or plastic or what have you. And I try to always buy the metal miniatures because I like painting metal miniatures. There's something about the weight of them and the heft. All right, so anyway, let's get back to the discussion. I'm way off topic here. So RPGs versus war games. So yeah, I'm playing a lot more war games right now, mainly because I can get in and get out. I can find an opponent. But let me tell you, I am really, really itching to play some RPGs. Mainly because since COVID started, I've been able to play some RPGs online. And I'll be honest, I don't like playing online, but beggars can't be choosers, right? I mean, you take what you can. I have found some new friends online through playing online. I discovered an advanced D&D game that just, for some reason, it just called out to me. I said, I'm going to try it. So I signed up and came in. I didn't know anybody, didn't know the DM or the players, and ended up playing, I think, 3 sessions before I was like, yeah, I've had enough. It was fun, but I wasn't going to, they were hoping to find players that were going to go long term. I told them, I said, guys, I like Advanced Dungeons and Dragons, but that's not the game for me. I'm not really wanting to go long term. So they were looking for long term players, so I figured rather than take a seat from them, I would give it up and let them find somebody else. But it did allow me to gain enough confidence and enough, not confidence, memory. I remember what it was like running some of these old school games, and so I started playing an old school Essentials game online. I ran it a few times. I was the referee or the DM or GM for a few games just because I wanted to see how the game worked. And so I did get to play old school Essentials for quite a little bit, probably at least 5 or 6 sessions online, before I quickly realized that that was definitely the game for me. Yeah, the lighting just doesn't really do it justice until you see it in person. Can't wait to show you some pictures of this. All right, so what I'm going to do next is I want to hit those blue with just a little bit lighter blue. And I think that's gonna give him the effect I want. The question, which I'm not trying to avoid, is which do I prefer, RPGs or war games? Well, that's sort of an unfair question because I like both. And I can't say, oh, I love RPGs 60% and war games 40%. It just depends on my mood and the time. If I'm in a really creative mood, I want to play role-playing games. And the reason being is with role-playing games, the DM or the GM is not limited to anything. I mean, anything you can imagine, you can describe to the players. War games are not done theater of the mind. War games are played on a table, going to be played in person. You can play them online. There are people that play war games online using software like, Tabletop Simulator and things like that. I've tried Tabletop Simulator for playing war games, and I got to tell you, it just wasn't for me. So war games, definitely, you got to have an opponent, and you've got to have physical minis and terrain, or at least some sort of terrain to simulate the battlefield that you're playing on. And so with RPGs, you don't have to have that. You could sit there at the table, and you don't have to have any terrain, any minis, although I do prefer that, and you can simply describe what the players are seeing. When I'm feeling really creative, an RPG scratches that itch because I can come up with a story, with an adventure, with a villain, with all kinds of craziness that I normally would be limited to for a war game. Since a war game has a start and a finish that's fairly quick, you're dealing with. There's not a lot of storytelling with war games. It's usually, get on the battlefield, defeat your enemy, and go for the next game. Now, there are campaign war games that have a story, but the story is usually sacrificed for war games. You usually don't get as detailed a story as you might like. So just keep that in mind. So again, it comes back to, if I'm feeling very creative, I want to take that creativity and apply it to a war game. Apply it to an RPG. I don't get that with war games. To answer the question, which do you prefer? Well, I prefer whatever I have time to play, and I prefer whatever my mood currently is. So, my mood may be, if it's creative, like I said, I might want to play an RPG. If it's more tactical, if my mood is like, I don't know how to describe it. Maybe fellow wargaming players will understand it, but sometimes I want to play a tactical game. I want to play some strategy. I want to play something that's going to make me look at the situation and come up with a game plan. And that's usually a war game. And if you've never played any war games, as a matter of fact, it was funny. Somebody the other day told me that I'm not into war games. I don't like war games. I just like RPGs. I'm like, okay, that's cool. But I think to myself, if I had never played a war game before, if I had just written them off as, oh, that's not for me, and never tried it, I would have never discovered Frostgrave, for example, which is one of my favorite war games to play. I would have never discovered 5 Parsecs. I would not have been in the mindset to go looking for these games that I can play solo, like 5 Parsecs or Core Space or what have you. I would have just stuck with RPGs, and that would have been that. So I don't know if you can see. He looks a little weird. He looks splotchy, but that's because I haven't applied the wash yet, and then I'm going to dry brush to bring everything, hopefully pull everything together. All right, because he is all blue, I am going to take a blue wash right here called Blue Tone, and I'm going to give him a complete hosing down with this stuff. What it's going to do is it's going to knock off some of that really bright blue and fill in some of the cracks and the eye sockets and things and allow him to get a little darker. And then when I dry brush, the hope is that it'll just sort of blur the 3 different blues, dark, medium, and the light blue. And if it doesn't pull it off, I don't care, because it's still a very wild looking. I mean, I could totally use this as an alien in Stargrave. He is weird looking. I could use him in a Frostgrave game. I don't know what he'd be, but he could sub in for something that the players are gonna, or the warband is not gonna want to encounter. The paint has dried really fast. So I'm gonna go ahead and hit this with some blue wash. And as I've said numerous times, guys, I am not a professional painter. I try, but I go with what I like. It's just got to look good on the table. I don't want an unpainted mini on the table. So in that sense, what I'm looking for is just get some paint on the guy and make him look good. And even if he looks bad, if I painted it, that's on me. I don't care. I'm not entering him in any painting contests. As a matter of fact, I went back and looked at the 2 previous videos I did, the paint and rambles, and both of them were about an hour's worth of painting. And that's typically what I find. I don't want to spend more than an hour painting a mini. I mean, obviously, I wish I could paint like 5 minis an hour or 10. I could batch. I don't do a lot of army type painting where you could batch process it. Like you have 10 soldiers that are all the same, so you do their pants, and then by the time you get to the last one, you go back and you do their boots. I don't do a lot of batch painting. I have done it, but I don't do that. So I'm typically doing one unique mini at a time. Because of that, I don't want to spend a lot of time. So the 1 hour that I'm finding is what I'm spending on these minis that I do. Like right now, I have no idea how much time I've been going, but I'm betting that when I finish this and sign off, this video is probably going to be closer to an hour, maybe a little over, but only because I think, and it may be faster. This was a much faster mini because he doesn't have like swords and weapons and armor, and he's sort of naked. So very, very simple to paint. This one may be one of my quicker ones. Believe it or not, that wash really did tone down that light blue that I put on him. And what I want to do now is I want to get some of it off. I put it on pretty heavy, so I'm just sort of taking some off and trying not to let it pool. And I do see it pooling in a few places, which is fine. I'm not going to let it pool too much. Also, it'll take a long time to dry, and I need to wrap this video up. Now, what I am going to do is once he's dry, I'm going to go in those eye sockets and probably paint like red or yellow or green. I'll give dots of energy coming out of those eyes because they're really too dark right now. All right, I'm going to pause the video real quick and let the paint dry, and I'll come back and finish up the painting and the video. Okay, the paint is dry. Now what I want to do is give him a quick dry brush of just a common blue. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go over him with this sort of, it's almost like the middle medium that I put on. I'm going to dry brush that, and if you're not familiar with dry brushing, it's pretty easy, and it's also one of those really odd things that I don't know how it works, it just does. So what I've got here is I've got a brush that's got real puffy type bristles, and I'm just going to soak it in. I'm just going to get all the bristles coated in that blue, and then you just get that blue off. See, it's leaving a lot on the thing. I don't know if you can see this, but it's still leaving a little bit of blue. And then what you do is you just sort of swab over him a little bit, and that is definitely doing what I wanted it to. It's toning down the lighter blues, and it's bringing that darker blue up just a little bit. May have done a little bit more than what I wanted, but that's okay. Pretty pleased. You may not be able to see it here, but the eye sockets are still black. The dark paint is down in there, or at least the wash is. So I can see the eye sockets to get them really good. Let's try a thicker yellow. I'll go with yellow, might as well. So this is very bright and very thick. So that will allow me to put a little dot in hopefully the eye section here. I am horrible with my brushes. I just don't take good care of my brushes, and I probably should. Let me put a little bit more in there. This one's not as big as the other one. Paint, by the way, when paint dries, it contracts. So if you put a nice little bead of yellow, they look big, but trust me, they're not. His eye sockets are that big. If you put a good bead in there, when it dries, it's going to contract. So you may have to go back and do it again. I also tend to dab with my finger around it to catch any that may have gone over. Your finger, it's still wet enough you can sort of get it the way you like it. All right, so in conclusion, the question was, which do I prefer better, RPGs or war games? I don't know if the question was asked because I doubt the question was asked because the person was wanting advice. Should I play RPGs or play war games? I suspect they just wanted to know where I stood. Probably because I have been very obvious about my playing of both. I know players here in Atlanta who only play role-playing games. They don't play RPGs. They don't play war games. And I know war game players who do not play RPGs. And that's fine. I sometimes, it's not that I feel sad for them. I'm like, dude, you have no idea. For the RPG players that won't play war games, I just think you don't know what it's like sitting there moving your miniatures around, measuring the distances and plotting out the tactics. There's some of that in an RPG, especially in combat, but not to the level of a war game, especially some of the better war games. But then again, I have war game players who don't play RPGs, and I'm thinking to myself, you haven't had the enjoyment of leveling up a character and finding some new weapon or magic item that saves the day. And I just think to myself, don't limit yourself. If you can't decide between RPGs and war games and your finances are limited or your time is limited, then yeah, obviously you don't need to decide, but yeah, if you want to play a game, you're going to have to make a decision. And probably the only thing I could offer is that, time, if time is the issue, RPGs can take a lot of your time. Typically players meet weekly or twice a month or sometimes once a month. Once a month isn't as bad, but it also depends on your job. If you work nights and these players play during, in the early evening or whatever, that's not going to work for you. Although I will say this, here in Atlanta, living in a big city does have its advantages, because there have been times when I've gone into the game store, one of the game stores here in Atlanta, during the day, like at lunchtime, and there were war gamers. And I remember one time, it hadn't happened recently, but I remember one time walking in and there was an RPG going on. And I think I just think it was a bunch of guys that took on their lunch break or something and came and played at the store for an extra hour or two. I don't know. But it's a tough decision. And I get it. Not everyone is lucky enough to be able to, play games all the time. I mean, it may seem like I do, but I don't. I do have a job or jobs that I do to bring income in. But I'm very fortunate that a lot of my income comes from the gaming world, the gaming hobby, and so I'm able to spend a little more time in this world than a lot of people. But if you can't decide, if you're trying to figure out an RPG or a war game, I think war games will be easier to get into. They won't require the time. You could play a one war game and never play it again. With an RPG, you may be playing with a group that sort of depends on you being there, especially if you're the cleric. And that's an inside joke for RPGers. If you're a war game player and you didn't get that joke, don't worry about it. But I can tell you there were times when, as a DM, I showed up at the table, my players showed up, but guess who wasn't there? The cleric player. And you could see it in the player's eyes. Oh man, we don't have a cleric tonight. So RPGs definitely have, I think, in my opinion, a little more time demand on them. They a little more responsibility on the player's part. Whereas war games, you can sort of play when you want, even if it's once a month or once a quarter. You could probably find someone who's willing to, it'd probably be a fan of the game, someone who could play anytime, anywhere. I'll play that game. So that's the advantage of a war game. War games are usually one-on-one. If you're looking for a group dynamic, if you're looking for imaginative storytelling and epic battles between multiple characters and classes and races, and an RPG is gonna scratch that itch for you. I guess in conclusion, my answer to that question is it goes back to what I said initially. My choice between an RPG or a war game, it depends on the mood I'm in and how much time I have. If I only have a limited amount of time this week, it's probably going to be a war game. But once COVID's over and I can find a day that I could meet weekly or bi-weekly with a group of players, I really want to start refereeing again an RPG because I miss it. So anyway, that's all I've got for you in this episode. If you've got any suggestions for what you'd like me to ramble on, and it is rambling. I don't necessarily have an agenda. Sometimes I try to tackle a script, but a script is kind of hard when you call it Paint and Ramble. So for the next episode of Paint and Ramble, if you've got an idea, or for a future episode, if you've got an idea for a Paint and Ramble, let me know in the comments and I'll see what I can do. I'm happy to talk on any topic that I am qualified to talk on. If I'm not qualified, if it's a game that I've never played or have very little knowledge of, probably not going to be much of a ramble topic for me. All right, I will take some pictures of this and post them at the end of this video. And please remember, this video is being released 1 week ahead for my patrons on my Patreon. They get this video 1 week ahead of everyone else, and then it'll be released. So if you want to see not just this video, but all videos that I release, when they come out, please consider becoming a patron of mine. It's only $1 a month, and not only do you get access to all the videos, but I have a whole lot of freebie PDFs and gaming stuff that I'm releasing. I'm going to be doing some live Zoom talks or live Zoom discussions where you guys can join in, and we'll talk about whatever you guys want to talk about. I will typically have a subject, but we can talk about whatever you want to talk about, and I welcome you to come join those. So all of that is going to be made available to my patrons, and again, it's just $1 a month, and what that does is it's not going to make me rich, but it does allow me to continue to keep doing these videos and releasing them and taking time to play some games, paint some minis, and talk with you. So anyway, all the information on the Patreon will be in the link below. This is Jim, the Tabletop Engineer. I'll be back next week with another episode of Paint and Ramble. Take care.